Chumash could survive on just trading between the different groups of Indians out there. But by the time these guys came here in 1867, they realized that the land was available for the next step. There was a devastating drought in 1863 and 64 that killed off the cattle industry. Rafael Gonzalez, who's one of the 8 grantees of Colonia, was down here and running cattle. But when he lost his cattle there, he went back up to Santa Barbara. And so when Christian came in 1867, he bought 1,000 acres from Jose Libero. Libero bought his from Camarillo. And he saw thousands of acres of his wild mustard plant. And the first thing he did was actually harvest that wild mustard plant. And he got 2 cents a pound, and he became one of the top 10 producers in Ventura County. Then he planted the first commercial crop, 30 acres of barley and wheat. The wheat didn't do well, but the barley did. Once he planted that kind of changed the idea of what would happen on the plain. Because with this barley, you could grow it without having a dedicated water source. You had dry farming, they called it. And you could just use Mother Nature to go ahead and irrigate your crops. And barley was very good in those conditions. And so therefore, in the next 20 years, barley became the #1 crop in the area. If you look at an article that came out in 1879 and all the different ranches in Ventura County, if a person had 100 acres, usually 80 acres or so was in barley, maybe 10 acres in corn to feed their hogs, and then they'd have their own citrus or whatever else they had on their property, but not for commercial purpose. So barley became the big crop in the area, and the reason is it was easy to grow. You plant it in the spring, it grew for you, and then you could harvest it and make your money at that time.
Is that barley on the left?
That would be a picture of the wild mustard plant.
Wild mustard.
You can make beer out of barley too.
Yeah, you can make beer out of barley and bread and other things. You know, one of the things people ask me about when I write about early area farming and so forth, they say, well what about the migrant workers? What about the farm laborers? Well, what people have to realize is that the first migrant workers were from Germany and Ireland and those kind of places, and they worked for each other. And in most cases, you know, they were leasing the land. They didn't come here with money and then buy a bunch of property. They were actually leasing the land. And this is an example here. It's kind of hard to read, but I'll interpret it for you. It's from a ledger from John Edward Borchard when he was paying Godfrey Maulhardt $1.50 an acre, $1.50 an acre to cut barley. And they got paid $81.75. And then all the other things, they end up making $1.50 an acre for cutting the barley by hand. So that just shows you that they were working for each other, and it was kind of a hard thing to do. It took them a while before they could buy their own land. Let's see what it's. This is an article from the Daily Alta, California in 1868. And it's talking about what was going on in the area, what was here. And this reporter came up with this description of the area. He said, traveling for more than half the distance was heavy upon the horses owing to the undermining of the growth of the many gophers, squirrels, and mice, which are still here today. So there were no trees. The Oxnard Plain had no trees. Hueneme didn't have trees. And at that time, there was no lumber yard. There was no wharf. So it was hard for people to go ahead and build a home. So in most cases, what they would do is they would just take what was available to them. Here's another example of what they did to build their own homes. In 1869, This article said, every conceivable material that one could imagine was appropriated for the erection of their habitations. And many dwelt in tents, and a number constructed their own domiciles of poles and mustard stalks. Again, they were camping. They're out here camping, trying to see if this is going to be the area where they're going to stick around and make a living. By 1869, Angel Gonzalez Escandon was a mayor of San Buenaventura. He went over there to see if he could go ahead and make this into its own county, but he faced a lot of opposition because Santa Barbara did not want the separation. Another thing that helped the change is in 1871, the Ventura Signal started its first newspaper in the area, and from there it could go ahead and talk about what was going on in the area, talk about the assets and so forth. One article from 1872 said that the county, if it separated, would be 2,000 square feet and would have a population of 3,500. Also, the Santa Barbara population was about 7,000. So let me go back here just for a little bit, just for one screen. 1869 was another important time too for this area, because in 1869, that's when William Barnard actually set up this settlers league where he tried to support the people who thought that there was this area to go ahead and farmstead. So from Camarillo to Hueneme to Magoo was a 17,000 acre swath of land that Barnard thought was government land. And that brought a lot of people here too. And those are the same people living in the tents here until there was some kind of resolution. So from 69 to 72, Barnard was in opposition with Thomas Bard on who owned the land. Eventually Bard won, and those people had to pay up or leave. William Hobson was very important because what he did, he went to the assembly in 1872 and persuaded them to go ahead and vote for the separation. So the announcement came on March 22nd, 1872 to take effect on January 1st, 1873. These were the townships of the area, and Hueneme is one, Saticoy, and Ventura. Those are the three new townships in Ventura County, the new Ventura County. The election precincts were the ones listed up here. These were some of the men that were first elected in February 1873. You can see Cephas Bard's name up there. He was a county coroner, Thomas Bard's brother. Then they had to do a final settlement with Santa Barbara when they announced their separation. At that time, the new Ventura County had assets of $72,000, a debt of $70,000. But with all that, they still had $1,682 in excess assets. 1873, there were 95 ranches in Ventura County of 100 to 200 acres. There were 16 ranches between 200 to 500, 17 between 600 to 1,000, 12 ranches between 10,000, 1,000 to 10,000, and only 7 with over 10,000 acres. So the total was 383,000 acres in farming. There's some people I mentioned earlier that were here at that time, and their families are still here. That's Juan Camarillo, the father of Adolfo, and his wife, Matilda, and then Jose Maria Covarrubias. Camarillo also has other connections. I know with my family is that we leased our first property from him in 1869 and bought it in 1872. And then his oldest son's name was Luis, and he went by Louis. And my great-grandfather was born, and he was baptized Louis Maulhardt. His brother was baptized and named after Juan's second son, Adolfo, so we also have an Adolfo Maulhardt in the family. In 1873, both Hueneme and Ventura built a wharf. The steamship Colorama came out every 10 days or so, and they deliver goods or take them out of the area too. So the Hueneme Wharf was actually built better and stronger. Ventura Pier was always going through a period of reconstruction. It was affected more by the weather. These are the first products that were shipped from the wharf: barley, corn, beans, wool from the sheep, pigs, sheep itself, and also petroleum. This is the population of students of Ventura County in January 1873. We know that Hueneme became its own school district in May of 1873. So, but starting at this time, San Buenaventura had 323. Going down closer to this area, San Pedro is actually the Oxnard area. There were 76 students. Some of those, when Hueneme opened up, went over to Hueneme. And what else? There were 4 students in Las Posas, or in Simi Valley, and 5 in Las Posas. Oh, wait, I like this picture for a lot of reasons. One, I don't know if you can see this, but a lot of those boys, they're in the Sunday best, which included no shoes. And I read some interviews years ago from some of the early farming families, and they talked about they usually had 1 pair of shoes, and they usually wore them on Sunday. And going to school a lot of times, if the weather was right, they didn't wear shoes. And a lot of times, I have another picture too, I don't know if this shows it here, but they have these sticks, and the sticks were used to play baseball at recess time. And this is always another interesting point. It's right here, you see, it looks like a noose. So I don't know if that was for the students or the teacher, but in any case, there was a thread out there.
To the bell.
There you go. Hueneme School established May 1873 via petition from William Barnard v. Browning. And then that became the area too where they'd have all the elections, the precinct elections. This shows the trotting fair. 1874 is when that started, and it used to showcase the importance of horses for their power, for the grace, the beauty, and so forth. So that's how the fair actually began. Eventually it started adding animals and produce, and it's evolved into the Ventura County Fair today, and hopefully we'll see a lot of major improvements in that in the next coming years. Right, Richard? Oh, we got to talk about the first baseball game. Same year, 1873. That's when the Ventura Club, the professional club, scored 56 runs, and then the citizens that gathered up, called the Pick Nine, scored 17. It's like the Dodger pitching nowadays. The Ventura Signal, they were really anxious to get the word out about being their own county and encouraging people to come. So this is a wanted ad in the Ventura Signal, January 4th, 1873. It said, 1,000 men with or without families to do general farming on their own account or on shares. 5,000 ditto. To plant fruit trees, 500 dairymen, 500 gardeners, as many common laborers. In fact, no one need fear to come to Ventura County who is not afraid of work and who is willing to sow and wait for the harvest. So they're definitely trying to get people here. The opportunity was wide open. And then 150 years later, we bear the fruit of the population of 850,000 residents. That's included contributions from thousands of new immigrants over the years. We have a lot of events coming up in the next several months. I wanted to point out the top one. I'm a part of the Oxnard Historic Farm Park. And on September 9th and 10th, we're going to have a weekend of celebration there. A private event on the 9th where we're going to try to do everything related to 150 years ago, including food from the time, clothing, everything, music from the time. The next day, we hope to have a vintage craft fair and use that existing Filer Park next to us and a bunch of food trucks that allow people to come out on the 10th of September and see our displays at the farm park and enjoy the day. And then a lot of other ones will be advertised throughout the Ventura County Museum website. Okay, so at this point, I'll go ahead and take a few questions, and then if you want, I have a couple of books here. I didn't bring that many, but if you need them, you're always welcome to come to my farm park in Oxnard. Oxnard Historic Farm Park is open every Saturday and Tuesday from 9 to 12. And with a show of hands, how many people have been to the Oxnard Historic Farm Park? About 6 or 7. Okay, thank you. Anyways, it's a project I've been working on for 20 years, and it has, the building is built by Godfrey Maulhardt in the 1870s. We have an acre of land. We have old bean thrashers from 1903. We have old tractors, 8 old tractors. We have crops from the past, so we're growing sugar beets right now, a little plot of sugar beets, lima beans, barley, corn, all the original crops from the time. And then we have other displays and so forth there. So if you're ever bored on a Saturday between 9 and 12 or Tuesday, 9 and 12, come on out and we'll give you a tour and you can see what we're all about. Okay, any questions? I'll go ahead and take any questions right now. Yes, the very back.
How much were the acres when they bought them?
I can give you a couple examples. I know my family, when they came here, they leased the land in 1869 for 50 cents an acre from Juan Camarillo. But when he sold it for $10 an acre in 1872. $10 an acre. So right around the time here in 1873 when it became a county, that's probably about the going rate. You know, it depends on the area. If you're going over to Conejo, it probably was less because they had less water, harder to grow certain types of crops and so forth. But over here with this rich alluvial soil that's being paved over, they definitely would charge more. Yes?
The slide showed the ship coming here approximately every 10 days.
Yeah.
To the pier.
Uh-huh.
Where did it bring the goods from here? What was its primary destination from this point?
It would go up towards San Francisco. That was San Diego, this area, San Francisco. Those were the areas that were the stop-off points. And again, they would bring goods, and then it also ship anything that was going north or south afterwards.
What'd they bring?
You name it. Well, you know, like, you know, stuff that you couldn't get inland. Like, it was harder to bring stuff, you know, across. Yeah, lumber was a big thing that they brought. But any goods that couldn't be grown around here, but they definitely shipped out the products. That was important for the people around here. That's what helped them grow. Yes, in the back?
When did they start planting the trees? And because you said there were no trees.
Well, one of the first types of plants that they planted, and Thomas Bard was instrumental in this, was planting the eucalyptus trees because they found out that they grew fast and they served as windbreaks. You know, we get those Santa Anas still, and we also get the onshore every now and then too, which is also just as brutal. So that was very important to the early farmers as a way of also creating a border between their properties, but also protecting their crops and so forth. So 1870s, 72, 73, around there, they started planting a lot more of those type of trees. And the citrus didn't come until like 1890, Santa Paula area, but didn't take over the rest of the county until probably about the teens and 20s. Even walnuts were very big in this area for a while, up through the 50s and 60s. And, you know, depending on the crop, you know, when you went from dry farming like barley and lima beans, you didn't need a big workforce. The older boys would get out of school usually in the spring and the fall to help plant and harvest. And the girls would get off on Mondays to do the laundry with the family. So it was important for everybody to go ahead and work for each other up until the next crops came. Sugar beets really changed the area because you needed a dedicated workforce and more people would come in. That brought in a bigger population. And that's all described very much in detail in this book right here for only $20. And for $40 with more detail. Yes, sir?
What was the wild mustard used for? It said they got 2 cents a pound or whatever. Was it feed for animals or what
No,
was it
the
used
animals didn't like it. It was definitely used for a condiment and so forth that they would send back east. So for cooking and even Europe, believe it or not.
Are there remnants of the wild mustard still around?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You drive around, you see those.
It's
The picture I
yellow
took
one,
was.
right?
Yeah. And they think. I mean, there's different theories on how it came here. It's not native to the area. They think that when the Spanish came here, they brought it one of two ways: either as a way of throwing the seed out and creating a path from mission to mission, or it probably came over with the cattle, more likely. It came over with the cattle and the sheep that they brought over, and it was within their hide and the wool, and that's, well, it probably spread. Yes, sir?
What was the motivation for separating Ventura from Santa Barbara County?
Well, there was a couple. One, they wanted more autonomy, and they felt like if they had their own county, then maybe they could develop faster too, not having to go all the way to Santa Barbara to communicate and so forth. So communication was another big part of it, because there was no road really to Santa Barbara along the coastline yet. You had to go inland to go around. It was they felt like they're being neglected. It's just like when California, when it was part of Mexico from 1821, when Mexico got its independence from Spain in 1821 to about 1846, 48. During that time there was always a changeover in government because there was poor communication between California governors and the state of Mexico down in the south. So, example, Camarillo, when he came up in 1834, he was promised land and other goods and so forth. By the time he got here, there was a new governor that said, hey, I never promised that. You're on your own. I think I have it written down in one of my books. You'd have to buy all of them to find out. But I did come up with the fact, I think it was 21 governors in 46 years. So they didn't last that long. Alvarado, I think, had a longer tenure. He's the one that gave out a lot of the land grants in the 1830s. But yeah. Yes, ma'am?
Curious about Hueneme was one of the original of the places. Was it a lot larger back then?
Yeah, I mean, Hueneme was actually probably bigger than San Buenaventura
Absolutely.
at one time, in the early days and so forth. And the building of the wharf was instrumental in developing the whole county, because that's where, you'll see pictures in the past of wagon trains coming from Simi Valley or coming down the grade in Conejo, the Lewis Road grade, the one by the university, and coming all the way here to this wharf. So this wharf was a lot more prominent and more active.
Next month, we'll see pictures.
Yeah. This lady here is going to tell you all about it in full detail. And how many books do you have to sell? No?
No.
Yes, sir.
Is there any kind of rhyme or reason how the counties were developed? Like, why did certain area break from Santa Barbara, and why didn't, say, it stop at Conejo, include the valley as part of the county, and how they made and where LA County why didn't they move south or north? Is there any?
I think a lot of the reasons because the hub was around the mission, and so the missions were. I'm not sure how many miles they expected them or how many day travel they expected between each one, but the hub started around the missions and then from there broke off. But the missions were definitely the starting point. And the missions would usually get established in the area they thought had access to water and also the coastline and things that would help them and benefit them in growing. Yes, sir?
Didn't they propose a pipeline, a petroleum pipeline from Santa Paula to Hueneme at one time?
I've heard that. I haven't done any research on that. There's a lot of things over the years that have been promised that didn't happen. And, you know, you get politics involved, and that can affect a lot of things, including historical museums.
Yeah.
I know for myself, my farm park, I've been working on it for 20 years. You know, in most cases, my interaction with the city of Oxnard has been very positive. But the problem is, you have a lot of different people you have to deal with. So not everybody knows what each person does. And when you think about it, what I tried to do was something that's never been done in Oxnard, and that is to get the developer to go ahead and give the land back to the city, and the city to lease it back to the nonprofit. So it was always my idea to create a win-win situation for the Bob Filer family. When they're selling that 50 acres, I knew that we had these old structures that were built by the Maulhardts in the 1870s, and that they had to go ahead and address that issue. And so I was able to propose a plan where they would go ahead and carve out an acre, sell the land, so the Filer family didn't lose any money. They got the full money for the property when they sold it. We didn't interfere with the sale of it. The city actually now has an asset in the form of a farm park that they don't, participate in. They don't give us money, which is fine, because we also don't want their input. And then we went out as a community, because we have a developing farm park that might create a model for the future whenever you have a chunk of land and you need to find a way to go ahead and preserve something. And again, you can't save everything. If I had my way, this would still be horse and buggy out here. But I know that you have to compromise. I know when I was doing the farm park, I had some people come up to me and say, well, you're getting an acre of land. You should be trying to get 5 acres. You should do this, you should do that. I said, well, you should be quiet and listen, because you can only do so much, You have to give and take. I understand the developer has to make money, the family has to make money, and down the road, we want to go ahead and raise money. Yes, back?
I'm just curious, when the Chumash Indians left, or when they, were they still here in the 18th or 19th?
Did they irrigate?
No, the Chumash Indians,
Uh-huh.
were they still here, or did they,
Well, yeah, I'm not an expert on the Chumash in any way, but, from everything that I've read, I'm sure you read too, is that their population totally dwindled when they came in contact with the Spanish, because of all the diseases and stuff that they weren't immune to. So in that one slide, I show that there was 99 Chumash in 1860. So we're down to under 100 Chumash remaining of, these 10,000 Chumash at one time. But it wasn't like an overnight thing, but you did have periods of time where hundreds of people would die at a time. So it was really during the mission period when that was happening. It wasn't like the Spanish were lining them up and shooting them. I don't think that was the case in any way. And I don't think they were trying to eliminate the population. They were trying to do what they thought was right, which was, bring them to God, their God. And so it turned out to be a unfortunate situation for the Chumash. But yeah, they were still here, but I think in small numbers. And because they weren't real involved with the community, they probably didn't take up much more action in the community at that time either. But that, to me, that'd be a really interesting presentation if somebody who is really an expert on that could talk a lot about that. Because I get those kind of questions a lot, and I feel bad because, I'm not an expert on the Chumash. But I respect them. Yes?
I wanted to ask you where your family came from.
They came from Germany. The Maulhardts and Borchards, my great-grandmother was a Borchard. They came over in 1867 from Germany. In Germany at that time, they had the Prussian Wars. In 1866, there was a Battle of Hanover, and the Maulhardts were in that. They actually won. They kicked the Prussians' butt. But after 3 days not getting any kind of reinforcements, they were captured. So it's either like join the Prussians or go to California and try to find that Borchard they heard about that came over in the gold rush and see if maybe there's some opportunities there. So I always say my family, they were lovers, not fighters. But what they would do in a lot of European families, they would send the youngest son of a family out to search. And that's what the Maulhardts did. They sent out Anton Maulhardt, the youngest brother, in 1866 to find Christian. Once they found them, and of course, communication was really slow back then. You had to get it through a ship and so forth. So by the next year, that's when two groups of Maulhardts and another group of Borchards came over, and they went to Northern California because that's where he was at. But then Christian in 1866, he actually had, he was part of he lived in San Joaquin Valley that was flooded. So he came down here, and I mentioned in 1867, they're subdividing Santa Paula. So that may have prompted him to come down here. And then once he came here, he realized, wait a minute, I don't want 150 acres, I want 1,000 acres. And somehow he came in contact with Jose Libero. And Jose Libero at that time, we know the Libero Theater, Jose Libero at that time owned a bar, a billiard hall in Santa Barbara. And so I don't know if that's how Jose Libero got his property from Gonzalez or not, but he had the property and sold it to Christian, and he planted, and at that time it was undivided land. So he got 1,000 acres of Rancho Colonia. Go pick and choose what you want. He picked the property along the river area, river bottom area, Santa Clara, which was still free flowing because he had a lot of sheep. And the sheep could go ahead and get their water and graze and so forth. So that's what brought them here. Yes?
Do you have history then about how the two brothers found each other? Like,
No.
use of communication, and you couldn't just text somebody and say, where are you?
No, I think what it is, if anyone that was over here at that time, they would probably, send communication back and, this is the last place, whatever. And who knows if when Anton Maulhardt came, was like, oh, that's exactly where he said he was. He could have went someplace and, oh, no, he was here 2 years ago, but he's over here now. So there's no actually record on that. There's no conversation on it, but it would be interesting to know that. Yes?
Certainly we have a lot of irrigation. Can you expound a little bit on the evolution of irrigation? We talked about farming, and how the evolution of the irrigation got to where we're at today.
I can tell you a little bit about that. One thing I know and the stuff that I read is that a good portion of Rancho Colonia, which would be from Camarillo to McGrath, Hueneme to Magoo. That's El Rio de Santa Clara Ola Colonia, includes Hueneme. A lot of that area is marshy. So when they were starting to plant sugar beets in 1898, 99, 1900, they had to go through and set up a series of tiles, perforated tiles underneath the ground to drain the water out and get out. Then that was when the time that they started drilling for wells, water wells. So water wells became big. Another thing they did for anyone that lived along the Santa Clara River, they had a big ditch. Rose Avenue was actually called Ditch Road at one time. So there was a major ditch that came all the way down towards this area here, and then people would tap into that from that area there. Just in the back?
When did Oxnard, when was Oxnard developed, and did they encroach on some of Port Hueneme?
Yes,
Oh,
they
you're
did.
getting personal on that one. Well, Oxnard, they associate themselves with Hueneme up until 1898 when it became a town. So as early as 1896, another relative, this Albert Maulhardt, actually started doing some planting of sugar beets. And he planted a series of half an acre to a couple acres to 50 different plots through Ventura County to try to prove that sugar beets could grow here. Knowing that if they could get sugar beets grown here, they'd build a factory. They build a factory, you need a town to service the people. And that's what happened by 1898. In fact, 1897, October, that's when the Ventura paper announced that the Oxnard brothers would invest $2 million to build a sugar factory. And from there, the Oxnard family bought acreage from the Hill family, laid out the town site of Oxnard in 1898. By 1893, it became a city. And there's this story that goes around that I'm sure some of you have heard, and it's one that I've heard many, many times, but now it's changed over the years. But in 1963, on one of the anniversaries, one of the sons of, I think it was Benjamin Oxnard, one of his sons was interviewed about the name of Oxnard, the city of Oxnard. How did it come about? His story is that when they're getting ready to name from the town to the city, that Henry Oxnard was trying to contact Sacramento to tell them to name it Sukar, which would be a variation of it. Some people say it's a Greek form of the word. Some people say it's a Hindu form of the word, but it's another form of the word sugar. And supposedly the communication was so bad, they couldn't understand it. He said, oh, forget it, just call it Oxnard. What a great, fun story, right? If you keep reading that same article in 1863, he goes on to say, like, but the rest of my family doesn't really believe that story. They think that it's just a made-up one. So I kind of believe the latter, you know. It was named the town of Oxnard in memory of the Oxnard family because they own the property and they were building a factory. And I think when they went from the town, they went straight to the name of it. Now, they were talking about maybe naming it Bayard, you know, that was another one, and Anacapa. Those are a couple of names that they were talking about at the time, but it was never officially a part of the name of the area. Yes, ma'am.
How come Hueneme is so small?
Well, that's what next week you're going to hear about, or next month, Sherry's going to talk about that. But I think once Oxnard got started, they got aggressive for one thing,
Yeah.
and you know, it's tax dollars.
Okay.
And I don't know all the politics on that, but I know Hueneme kind of got the short end of the stick when they were kind of surrounded by Oxnard. There's no way to grow after that. And I was looking at a map recently, and you know, we have this Hueneme Beach here. It would have been nice if Hueneme could have got all the beaches, you know, and it could have been Hueneme Beaches, you know. So maybe you guys can do that someday. Yes, sir.
Where did the base, the naval base, become prominent over here?
In the 40s, World War II brought about a lot of development. And the other thing about the base that we have here in Magoo and so forth, what it really did for the population is it brought people here to work here and get a taste of our weather and our opportunity. And those same people have come back here. As I was telling somebody recently, if you look in our obituaries, majority of the people on there, oh, they came over here during World War II, or yeah, they came here in the 40s, 50s, and so forth. And so that definitely brought a big part of the population. And a lot of kids I grew up with, I didn't even know at the time, but their parents came here because of the military. I thought everybody was from farming families. Yes?
So is that still true? Is that still how we're attracting more residents, is through the military?
I don't think as much, not the same proportion by any means, you know, but I'm sure anyone that comes here likes it, may want to stay, but I'm not sure as far as the numbers. I think a lot of people that live in LA or San Bernardino or all those crowded areas, and I meet these people all the time at the farm park, they come here and they said, I just can't believe how great this place is. It's not all built up. And I'm going, what are you talking about? What are you, crazy? But for them, it's not real built up. So it's still good in a lot of ways, of course. I wouldn't leave, and I enjoy my time here. It's fun. Meet people that grew up here. Right, Bucky? Yes, ma'am, in the back?
Hueneme is named after the Chumash?
Yeah, from what I understand, Chumash, Hueneme
Yes.
means resting place. You know, the Chumash are, again, they would live along the coastline. There's three groups of Chumash: the coastal, the island, and the inland, which would be more towards like Thousand Oaks, Newbury Park. There they would gather acorns and so forth. That was their trading product. And then you had the Chumash along the coastline that would fish. And then you had your the island that had different shells and so forth that they would use for their trading and so forth. But yeah, I always heard it was resting place. Yes, sir.
How's the Oxnard Air Force Base coming about?
Again, through the war. I'm not sure all the details on it, but a lot of development here came about because they thought it was, it was a training center too out there, right? You're talking about the Oxnard here? Yeah, it was a training center.
Air Force Base out there by Camarillo.
Yeah,
That's Camarillo.
yeah, I'm not real sure on that one,
That
but
used to be Oxnard Air Force Base, right?
yeah, that's right. I'm not sure, but maybe you can do the fourth talk. You can do all the research on it. Do the fourth talk here. We'll come back and we'll know. And it's interesting because yes, I've written 16 local history books, but I feel like I've only scratched the surface. There's so much more history out there that I haven't even touched upon, and I don't ever expect to get all of it written down. So I just try to do what I can, and then it inspires us other people to write their books and do their chapter and add to the big story.
Can you,
Can I ask a question about that then, kind of off topic, specifically the historical part of it, of your resources, a lot of the newspaper articles and stuff, where do you find, the majority of it?
When I started doing this seriously in the early 1990s, I taught school over at Robert J. Frank, and I would get off from work and I would go to the county library and I'd go through the microfilm. And I would do that until I lost my eyesight, print out the most important ones, create folders. So, and newspapers one, all the different early biographies written about the early farming families, and I noticed there's a couple of them over here. Any of the interviews, like County Museum has a lot of interviews from the old timers. I do find that the interviews are fun for enriching the story, but not necessarily the facts. There are a couple of people out there that, you could read an interview, by the time you get to the end of it, you got a different story. So, but one example is this Christian Borchard, when he came and planted the first crop in the Oxnard Plain. The story is that he was a giant. Like, okay, well, how big's a giant? So one ancestor told me he was 6'8". I go, wow, that would be a giant for that time. Because I know for a fact that when Godfrey Maulhardt came here in 1867, he was 5'7". The second generation, Lewis Maulhardt, was 6'1". The third generation, my grandfather, was 6'4". I have a nephew that's 6'6". But Christian was born in 1816, and they said he was 6'8". So I had that information. Then I found some other stuff. One person said that when he walked down to Santa Clara Chapel, he was so big he would like rock the floor. Okay, it's still a big guy, But there wasn't a lot of records on it. Then I came across what they call the Great Register in 1890. When people would vote, they write down a physical characteristic. And I found out his height was 6'1"3/4". Now, he was in his 70s, so he might have lost a couple inches. So he's probably 6'3", 6'4" growing up, and he did seem like a giant. But I just proved the 6'8" theory. But I didn't say, oh, this guy is wrong for putting that. When I write the story, here's a story here, here's a story here, here's another one. You pick and choose which one you think is right. So that's how I try to do it. That's why my books are so interesting.
who does the geophysical history of this area?
I'm not sure. Do you know the geophysical history?
Yeah, like the way up to Ojai.
Yeah.
What earthquake, what tsunami, what made all of that? Who's the specialist?
Anyone here?
Well, there are a couple of companies in town that do a lot of that stuff, and they have a lot of historical information. So I know some people who are geophysicists who have that, because they use it currently for building as well.
Right, so there are.
Petroleum.
There you go.
Yeah, the petroleum was played a big part.
Yeah.
The
Well,
direct people were
in fact, like Thomas Bard, he came here on behalf of Thomas Scott, and he was trying to develop the Ojai oil rigs over there. He actually got so frustrated, he sent in his resignation in January of 1867. But communication didn't get back there fast enough. In the meantime, you got this Christian Borchard planting this first crop. Other people are starting to go ahead and farm, and he came up with a new idea, a new plan for himself, real estate agent. And he started, hey, Tommy boy, we can subdivide this and make some good scratch. I was like, can you speak English? Anyways, yeah, you're right. Yes? Yes? Sir?
Being a lifelong resident of the area, do you see any climate change from when you were a young man to now? Do you personally notice it?
Big time. I think I do. I mean,
In what respect then?
well, okay. For example, I know if you look at the history of the weather in the area, you're always going to have these catastrophic years or these extreme years and so forth. But it seems like the last several, we have a lot more. I'm not a scientist. I don't know for sure. I'm just talking about my own experience. Like this rain that we had recently, I loved it, you know, but it was just incredible. And I remember everyone I talked to, they're like, oh, yeah, we're getting more rain, but we need it. We get more rain, but we need it. Well, now with this May, gray, June gloom that we've had, this is like a prolonged one. I'm not saying it's going to be like this every year, but it just seems like we kind of have a lot of those. And even like last year, do you remember in the summertime, we had a couple of, I remember my house was over 100 degrees, you know? When I did my renovation back in 2000, we thought about getting air conditioning. I go, no, this is Southern California. We don't need that. You know, I'll sleep with the Hueneme fans on. And go, why did I do that? So I don't know if it is or not, but it seems like it's a little more extreme. Yes? Helen Brandt?
I can remember, I'm born and raised here in Hueneme, and I can remember going to school in the fall, and the east winds would whip through here where you could barely stand. We don't get those, we probably get the winds, but
Different
there's so
times.
much obstruction now, you don't feel that like you did then. They were really tough in those days.
Right. Even the eucalyptus couldn't slow them down. But you're right. You get the buildings, you get the asphalt, you get the cement and so forth. It's going to heat things up. It's going to change things a little bit. So there is some change. I'm not saying it's 100%, but there's definitely something going on here. Anyone else? Don't forget it's sunny outside. All right. Well, thank you all for your time.